Hi, could I ask everyone to take their seats, please? So we can get going with the next panel. Great. I hope everyone had a chance to look at Alice's work and add your own creativity onto it and grab a coffee. It's time for the third panel of the day, and this is looking at decentralising the arts, expanding cultural access beyond central London. So if I could welcome to stage again, back to Dr. Shwetal Patel, who'll be moderating this for us. Alongside him is Director of the East Bank, Tamsin Ace. That's, of course, the UK's newest cultural education quarter on Queen Elizabeth's Olympic Park. Mark Davy, who is founder of Futurecity, a multidisciplinary agency set up to promote culture-driven placemaking. So Mark's persuaded the cultural sector to invest in major art projects like the Crossrail Culture Line. And Sylwia, Krason, founder and editor-in-chief of contemporary Lynx magazine, an international arts publication based in London. Thank you all so much. And as we talk about this important subject, I'll hand back over to Shwetal. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We are a little over schedule. It's 11:54. This session is meant to finish at 12:30. We'll try and finish at 12:30. Thank you all very much for being here. I think this is a really pertinent discussion because it also seems to resonate politically with lots of other discussions that are happening for several years now around development in the country outside of London. And obviously we have a country that's highly unequal. And London, being the capital, has benefited from the economic and social diversity that the city and the institutions, and so the art world is definitely skewed in favour of London. So I think if I'm to interpret decentralising the arts beyond London, I think there's an attempt here to talk about the rest of the country. But I want to just start, Tamsin, with you, Director of East Bank, and I'd like you to talk a little bit about your role and what East Bank is. And then I think we'll move on, and then I'd like Mark to say a few words and Sylwia to say a few words, but go ahead.
Okay, so thank you. So I'm Tamsin, the Director of East Bank, and as Lucy mentioned, East Bank is the UK's newest cultural and education quarter, making its home on the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in East London, and it's come out of the ambitions and the legacy sort of role of the 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games held in London. And the East Bank partners are made up of UCL East, London College of Fashion, Sadler's Wells East, the V&A East Storehouse and Museum, and the BBC Music Studios. And these are sort of, as you will have heard from their names, they're very established institutions. UCL are 200 next year, the V&A will be 175 next year. And so they know how to do what they do. But they wanted to be part of East Bank and be part of this legacy programme because they wanted the opportunity to really think about how they might change and rethink about their institutions, and also that sort of ambition to be part of a partnership and part of a network, which is what East Bank is. East Bank is a collective within our business case, within our strategic objectives. The goal of East Bank is that these key institutions don't land and arrive like a spaceship in East London, sort of assuming and expecting that audiences were going to engage and enjoy and want to be part of their story. The idea is that these institutions collaborate. They come together to share ideas, to pool their resources, but most importantly, to be properly rooted and embedded in the communities of East London. Back in 2005, when the bid for London to host the Games went in, it was signed only if it would be hosted in East London. East London has long been an area of deprivation, has been forgotten about, but it doesn't mean that it's not bursting at the seams with creativity and energy and innovation. It just hasn't, in the last sort of century, had the opportunity and the resource and the platforms to kind of really kind of celebrate that. And that's what East Bank's role is to be there to really engage and learn from, but also elevate and platform the amazing creative communities of East London. And my role, I guess, is a new role as director. I call myself the glue sort of the person to spot the opportunities, to be that link between the partners, to sometimes hold them to account, to really kind of go, you're here for this reason. You're here to really think differently. You're here to think about what you could do in these institutions in partnership with the other ones differently, that you might then take back into Kensington, take back into Bloomsbury. It's about a chance to have a clean slate, but it's also to never forget who we're there to collaborate with, and to ensure that those voices are fully woven into the jobs that are created, the programs that are platformed, the training opportunities, so that we're fully rooted and embedded in the communities that we're being part of.
That's really, really interesting. And Mark, I'd like you to go next and talk a little bit about Futurecity, which you founded, but you're also an artist. You started out as an artist, and you've done work not only in London, but across the country, and also around the world. I think it really perfectly chimes with what Tamsin was just saying right now about embedding. I think that's something, probably a word you use quite a lot at Futurecity.
I think Futurecity is an unusual agency. I set it up in 2007, but previous to that, I was an artist for quite a long time. I also used to teach at art school. I was an academic at the University of Creative Arts, and a curator. And then I sort of stumbled into a world which I knew nothing about, which was the property sector, real estate sector, regeneration and urbanism. So I had all these interests, but I knew nothing about that sector. And I sort of worked on a couple of projects where, in a very sort of traditional sense of a public art consultant. But what I realized quite quickly was just the complete absence of the cultural sector in that world. And there we were in our sector with our own language, our own outputs, our own sort of rewards and so on. And then there was this other world, 1,000 times bigger than ours, that was sort of dealing with kind of creative ideas, but I think mostly in quite a crass and uninformed way, and completely oblivious to our world as we were to theirs. And so we slowly began to change from a public art consultancy to, I mean, the term now that everyone's using is placemaking. I think that term comes from trying to find a term that sector can sort of understand. And we realized there was just this amazing opportunity, getting artists into places that they never got into before at much earlier stages. And that's really been the Futurecity focus for the last 15, 16 years. All I'm driven by is how do we get artists into places they can't get to? How do we get money and funding and opportunities for artists in a way that they perhaps haven't had access to before? And along the way, I guess what it's also made me realize is that we're not working well in that sector. We're kind of hanging on to a reward system and a structure that's very old now, isn't it? We're seeing art schools straining to try and keep going, to pay for part-time lecturers and resources and so on. We're seeing that, and overseas students, and there's a whole debate about that. We're seeing the gallery system pretty much breaking down. We're seeing the funding opportunities almost non-existent. Sadly, as a boomer, I got the benefit of everything. I got grants and didn't pay fees, and I could go on an unemployment benefit in between and holidays. We did well, and as artists, we could survive. Where there was part-time teaching and so on. All of that's broken down. So kind of, sorry, before I go talk too long, I guess where I'm coming from this conversation is when we talk about decentralizing, when we talk about policy, we need to also understand what do we want as an arts community? What is our goal? Is it to kind of maintain what we used to have better? Or perhaps we're in newer times, we have to kind of rethink our purpose and our rewards and how we operate as a group.
Thank you, Mark. Sylwia, I'd like to talk about the international dimension to this, because historically the art capitals, Paris, St. Petersburg, London, Zurich, and today it's a global scene. I think you were just in Vilnius. You've talked about the art scene in Accra as an editor of an arts magazine. Tell us about what's going on globally vis-a-vis this decentralization, of course, now on a global scale.
Sure. Thank you for having me, and I tell you also a few words about myself, because I think it's important to show you who I am. I founded Contemporary Lynx magazine 2013. I was a student in London, And that was my project at faculty at Birkbeck University. And this was a blog about Polish contemporary art. It was the first blog in English about achievement of Polish artists around the world. So I started it with my friend, and it has developed throughout the years into art magazine. I had I gathered journalists and writers with great enthusiasm to also write about achievements of Polish artists. And later we started a print magazine. It was running for 10 years until 2023. But obviously we expanded into focus on more international art scene, but still with a really, really strong focus on Central and Eastern Europe. So I think it's important for you to know my background, because then you will understand the question of Shwetal about this global perspective. As today we collaborate with a lot of art fairs and art festivals, which are sometimes big, like Art Basel or Artissima. But at the same time, we travel to Art Vilnius and Mobu Art Fair in Romania, and Warsaw Art Fair and Warsaw Gallery Weekend in Warsaw. So I love this way that we can connect this very emerging initiatives and emerging markets with big established key players, which we're doing it successfully now for 13 years, and we're still expanding because we're still searching for new artists in Middle East, in North Africa, in Latin America as well. So yes, coming back to your question, it's very interesting to see how. I want to give you an example of Warsaw, but maybe, I don't know, maybe you want to switch first this.
No, go ahead,
yeah?
please. Yeah.
So, because I'm Polish and I travel a lot to Poland, I thought that would be the best example from Central Eastern Europe. Because what's happening now, it's a really emerging art scene. Warsaw is a capital, but it's not an art capital at all. It's never been. So now, like this spring, we had two interesting festivals. One is called Fringe. It was very bottom-up grassroots initiatives called Fringe Festival, and it gathered 96 initiatives throughout the city. It was as open studios, gallery openings in the abandoned shops, and private flats in a different district of the city. So it was extremely powerful, and we joined as a magazine, as a media partner, because I love the energy of people, you know? I've never seen anything like that before, that the pride. This is, I think, something what's happened now in Poland. People finally, after so many decades, are very proud of own culture, of own roots, of own, art. And that was extremely important. I think that's what we can relate to so many other emerging markets. Like first of all, people need to be proud of own origins, own roots.
Thank you. Going from Warsaw to Walsall and Walthamstow, what's interesting is that you've got these 4 boroughs around Queen Elizabeth Park, which traditionally didn't really have much access to this level of arts and culture. But then you've got a situation around the country, Birmingham, Manchester, Leeds, Bradford, other parts of the country. They're also going through a similar evolution. Tell us a little bit about your strategy in connecting what you're doing to other parts of the country, because I think that speaks to the kind of heart of this question really about decentralizing, because my view is that it doesn't have to be binary. It's not either London or the rest of the country.
No, not at all. And I suppose I can answer that in 2 parts. In terms of how we're committed to working with, there are 4 growth boroughs Hackney, Newham, Tower Hamlets and Moortham Forest, and we are committed to working with those 4 boroughs. And so one of the things that we're developing is a cultural strategy for the entire Olympic Park. So rather than having separate sort of Section 106 or, lease or kind of boundary sort of led cultural strategies, thinking about the park as a whole. And that's where it started, is what would it look like to create a sort of central vision for cultural programming in the public realm for the entire 560-acre site. And then we thought about how we kind of explode that out further, that we have 4 boroughs who are in financial peril, is that the right word? Really challenging times in terms of budgets being cut. 3 out of the 4 have cultural strategies, 1 doesn't. They have these cultural strategies, but as they're going through their budget reviews, the cultural programme is often the first to go. So again, it's looking at how do we use our sort of collective power and resource of East Bank within the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park to start working in partnership with the 4 boroughs to actually tell a much greater story. Like, how do we come together to sort of hit these joint ambitions and goals as a sort of sub-region as opposed to working in competition? And then we're looking at what that means nationally for us. So who are the similarities? Who are the places that have got similar setups to us? And obviously, for us, there's Salford, Media City up north, and have got, the BBC have also relocated and based themselves there. They have universities, they have sporting venues, they have really diverse communities. So rather than thinking about, I suppose, East Bank and the Olympic Park as a bit of an island, actually looking at how can we share, how can we collaborate? Are there joint research commissions that we can look at together? Because we have similar challenges within the communities that we're trying to reach. How can we kind of use I'm going to say this a lot, that partnership piece, that pooling of resources, that joining up of ambitions to tell that story on a national scale. The BBC obviously have this remit for this national vision, but they are choosing to put roots down in East London. What does that mean for them? What can they engage with and benefit from by being rooted in this very particular part of the city? But what does it mean for them when they are in Bradford, Birmingham, Salford, and how do we connect the dots? And it's always about that connecting the dots piece, I think, that's so important. And thinking about that we're not in competition, we have so much to learn from each other. Sadler's Wells East as a dance venue has carefully thought about the size of their auditorium, thinking about mid-scale dance as a mid-scale dance venue, which there isn't a purpose-built one of those in London. And what does that mean for the national dance community, that opportunity to be able to tour nationally, to have that platform, to have that access to funding opportunities, to have those press moments. So we're always thinking about that national piece and how do we, rather than London sort of leading the way, what do we learn from the regions as well?
Really, really interesting. Mark, you've worked all over the country, and I mentioned you've worked all over the world. How would you respond to what Tamsin's just said? I mean, he's clearly got an incredible mandate, incredible legacy. It's going to take years and years to kind of really, develop. But how would you respond?
Yeah, again, I mean, my experience in the last few years has been, well, until recently, has been mostly private sector. It's only in the last couple of years we've started to be asked by cities like Portsmouth and Exeter and Chatham. We're working in Basildon, Newtown, where we've been asked to get involved. And I think that's because we've had success in getting the private sector to fund the arts. Again, that's my interest, is how do you get the private sector to be part of this conversation? Because the danger, of course, is that it's the public sector looking after, having to work with the public sector. You know, it's East Bank working with the local boroughs, but probably the local boroughs as in the council, rather than probably the private sector businesses that are there. So that's been my interest. But we have been really successful. I'm going to use a couple of London examples, but I think it can travel. We recently, the English National Ballet's new home at City Island on the Thames, it came from our strategy work, in which we convinced the developer that rather than filling this space full of empty commercial units, that actually having an anchor arts tenant would be a good thing for them, for all sorts of reasons, but would also be good for the arts organisation. So the EMB have moved there. It's unlocked funding from their sponsors that wouldn't have been activated if they hadn't have had that building. And you'll still hear an announcement quite soon about the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra moving to Wembley in a similar kind of structure. They're taking a headquarter building, and there's a conversation about rehearsal space and so on. So it's really interesting, and I hate to say this, but I'm going to use the term market, but the market sort of is really interested in what we do. It's interested in culture and creativity. It's interested in places that stand for something. It's suddenly realizing that communities are a good thing, not something to ignore. But it's kind of trying to get the one side to meet the other side. Someone's liking it to a straight line meeting a wavy line. You can decide which one is which. But how do they connect? It's because, again, our languages are so different. But when you do get in at an early enough stage, it's amazing what is there. And, you know, I know the sort of demonization of developers. I mean, there's no such thing as a developer. There's a whole range of people that are building apartments and building retail units and so on, with different funding and different timescales. But, you know, in the end, if you can get in there early enough, if you can get your timing to be the same as theirs, and you can challenge what they're doing, it's incredible actually how open they are. And we've had real success in Greenwich Peninsula, for instance. The Now Gallery, if you went to it, was part of one of our strategies. The Conrad Shawcross's tower on the biomass thing. It's almost like anything is possible if you're confident and have an idea that you can deliver. In terms of Exeter and Portsmouth and Chatham and others outside of London, effectively the same idea approach is relevant. The Chatham, for instance, we have pulled together Chatham Civic, the Dockyard and Marine, which is the new private development, on a project called the Four Quarters. And the idea is that they all work together, that the intra area is the engine room for creativity and culture and arts and so on. The civic space in the town is where you can present things. The cluster of creative industries is inside Chatham Maritime, and the new development accesses that resource rather than just does it itself. So trying to create stronger partnerships between the cultural sector, particularly the institutions that bring brand and content and longevity, there's a real interest in that. Yeah, I'll probably say more, but I'll stop there.
Do you want to respond to it? Because I think some of this speaks to your work, which is the intersection of sort of media company, but you're going to art fairs, you're going to regions and cities that aren't really on the global art map, but are developing. I mean, it does seem what Mark is saying is very relevant in terms of this joined up thinking around commerce, around placemaking, around tourism, around local art scenes. What's been your experience? And give us one example maybe that you've come across in the last few years that really impressed you internationally.
We like who?
Sorry, what has something really impressed you on your travels?
Me impressed. Last week I've been to Art Vilnius at the art fair in Lithuania. And actually, I was very impressed, because the way how it's organized, because I saw for the first time this regional solidarity, because the art fair connects the Baltic region. So it's Latvia, Estonia, North Poland. So you have 3 different countries, each one with own culture. They are united by post-Soviet history, now by common threat, like Russia. And you could see they all came together in Vilnius to present the various private collections, present artworks from Estonia and all these countries. And I really saw this as a great example of solidarity and collaboration rather than competition. What also strikes me is that they didn't seek validation from, global markets. They don't need it because they well developed now. The countries are thriving, it's green, it's safe, it's beautiful. And maybe they don't need, anymore this, they don't look up, they don't need this validation. And that's what I noticed has changed across many emerging markets. They seek and they create own local communities. They back it up with the sponsors and private sector money. They combine public fundings, create new institutions, and create own ecosystems. And I think it's so many other regions like that, and it's a great example of this solidarity.
Thank you so much. We've got about 13 or 14 minutes left. I do want to take questions. If anybody has any questions, please do raise your hand, and then I'd like to also continue the discussion, but yes. Hi.
Just wondering, on the point about essentially assuring the benefits by private developers,
That's a really good question.
Excellent question, yeah.
I mean, so the rates mitigation, is that the rates mitigation? Yeah, so if you know, Hi-For Studios are a really great example of rates mitigation. We're effectively a charity. Basically, if you see an empty unit on the ground floor on say a residential development or in the high street, the reason that usually it's empty is because if the owner puts something in, it will activate business rates. So it's in their interest not to use it. So when we think we see an empty space, so why can't we get artists in there? That's usually the reason. But there is one way around it, which is rates mitigation, where a charity can take the space and they get effectively the rates, I think it's 80%. So there's one way. So it's a great idea. And Hi-For, I think, have been absolutely the leaders in sort of taking that idea and really doing it on a much bigger scale. But it's a really great idea that's not being used at all. And I just don't think there's an awareness of it. It's really interesting you asked that question. We launched something last week where we've been looking at, we called it the variety box. I don't know if you ever remember those cereal boxes with the little boxes, but we kind of had this idea that if we could get the ground floor commercial spaces on those residential blocks and curate content for not just artists, but designers, creatives, makers, and so on. The ground floor never makes any money for the developers. It's always empty. It's always a disaster. So we've worked with an architectural practice and an agency to look at the funding opportunities and to look at value systems. And values could be a whole range of things: community, PR and marketing and brand. It could be if you're renting, the build-to-rent sector, that idea of the ground floor being kind of active. Actually, near to you, Get Living scheme has I think it's Labby 20, which we developed, and that was meant to be for 6 months in a shell and core empty unit. It's now in its 4th year, funded by the developer because they've had such an amazing return, way in advance of just putting in not a very great business. So there are lots of. This is a discussion which I think is really going to grow in the next 6 months because there's an awareness now by developers, particularly, that the ground floor is a disaster, that they need these places to be activated. There's this artist and cultural community wanting to get in, and there are these major regeneration projects, the East being a great example of that, where it connects up. So I think you're going to see a lot of changes. I really do.
I think that really leads me to my final set of questions for everybody, really, which is, what does success look like? Because, in your case, Tamsin, this was launched 20 years ago. And there's been 3 different mayors, and they've all continued support of this, and it's going to take probably another 20 years for it to feel embedded, and there's lots of work between now and then. If you had the ear of policymakers, what are the really radical, bold policy ideas that you would suggest? I think that speaks to the title of this panel, but also I think generally.
Wow, that is a really big question. East Bank is on a journey, and I think, it's only now that people are starting to say that the 2012 Olympic and Paralympic Games has been one of the most successful examples of legacy planning and programme ever. And so now the world looks to London as seeing a sort of model of best practice, particularly with how it's woven culture and community into the plans and into the master plan. East Bank is on a journey. We're only 3 out of the 5 partners open. So, we won't be fully open until 2027 when the BBC Music Studios join us. So we have there's a lot of spotlight and a lot of sort of interest on us because Shiny Openings maintains that interest. So what makes me nervous is what happens when the private views and the openings and the launches stop. How do we maintain that interest and that energy and that partnership? So for me, success is that in 10, 20, 30 years' time, these institutions that have got long leases, they're committed, some of them have got 200-year leases to be there on site, is that they still see the value as being part of East Bank, that they're still thinking as a collective. And it's not about doing everything as a committee, but it's still looking at the value of what it means to be more than just good neighbours. Because I have no doubt that Sadler's Wells will continue to sell tickets to their shows. The V&A Storehouse, since they opened on the 31st of May, has had 250,000 visitors, which is extraordinary, with a huge percentage of those coming from the local communities. But if that keeps going, but the Storehouse isn't always thinking about the value and the benefit of building programs in partnership, looking at how they can really go to scale with those education plans and programs. If they're not properly rooting themselves in the communities of East London, then that to me won't be a success. A success for me is that the partnership thrives, continues, it evolves, that it's not exclusive, and that people across East London, across the world, kind of go, I get it, I know what East Bank is, I know what it means to me, I know what it means to my community, to my school, to my friend, I know what's in it, and I access it in a whole number of different ways. And it's not always about being in the physical spaces or on the park, it's about you might access that kind of opportunity in somewhere that feels safe and linked to you in your community. So that, for me, is what success looks like. In terms of the sort of policy, if I had the ear of the government, it's something that you kind of referenced earlier on, is that proper investment in creative education. We have to go back to that. The curriculum review is happening now. The creative subjects have to be fully embedded back in the curriculum. We run a summer school every year that all the partners program into for young people in the 4 boroughs, where they get to understand the range of roles within the creative industries. Because again, that is a term that's so broad. What does it actually mean? What are the jobs? What are the opportunities? So properly embedding it into the curriculum would be my call to government.
Wow. Mark?
Okay, I have a series of observations. So the first is that we don't have an organisation that represents us, basically. We think we have the Arts Council. I don't think the Arts Council represents this sector in the way that the world is going, the kind of opportunities that are there. It's being defunded. Its remit is more political. And I'm saying that I can say that as somebody from outside of that sector. And it's not necessarily a criticism of them. It's just that they're trying to do too many things for less and less money. And yet, if we had an organisation that really represented the arts inside the world that we're now moving into, especially around regeneration, then I think there would be way more opportunities. So that takes me to a positive. In the last, we've never actually put a number on it, but we have generated millions and millions of pounds of funding for the arts through our work in the private sector. Galleries, studios, commissions, strategies, partnerships. And it's even more relevant now that the arts are part of that conversation than it was before, going back to what I was saying about the market. So that would be my second point. And that model takes me to this idea. I heard this term the other day. I can't even spell it, but it's culturalpreneur, which I really like this idea. I don't know if anyone could spell it. I think I like this idea of the artist being a culturalpreneur. I think that we've got to try to wean ourselves off where we came from, because it's just not working. So unless, of course, government says, yes, we believe this idea that we're a creative sector, that we're a country that's generating creative and cultural ideas. And the reason for that, of course, is we've had 60, 70 years of great art schools generating tens of thousands of art students. But that's not working. So what's the alternative to that? How do we get out of that? And I think we've got to be much more entrepreneurial. If I was advising artists now, young artists now, I would be saying, set up multidisciplinary groups, organize yourself, not just artists, designers, writers, and create an energy, throw a rock in the pond, because it now is the time. But if we're relying on, the old funding coming from the local council, the regional regeneration groups, that money's gone. And unless someone puts it back, we've got to find new ways.
Sylwia, I think you're a culturalpreneur.
Yeah, actually, I know this other term, artpreneur.
Oh, okay, that's better.
But I like the culturalpreneur. But yes, I love what you said about this, the message for young artists, that how much they need to be entrepreneur these days, and yes, to create collectives or even companies, or having this business mind ingrained. It's very important. And in contemporary Lynx, that's what we do. Actually, we never rely on a public funding. We have sometimes nice projects through Arts Council, through City of Warsaw, but we need to keep going, and we promote every week new artists, new stories. It's 3 to 5 stories a week. When I work with many journalists, very international, from Romania, from Lithuania, from Berlin, London. yes, we learn how to be entrepreneurial a lot because you need to work with commercial sectors, with big art fairs, negotiate a lot, but at the same time the media is changing so fast, it's so dynamic. But also to be positive, I see that this digital connections helps so much communities in other communities like in Ghana, in Accra, where there's no infrastructure, there's no public funding, but they managed to develop this great ability to connect with international great curators and key players and collectors, and just spread the work and creativity around the world. And similar things happen in other parts of the globe. So I'm thinking that digital revolution really help young artists to thrive.
Thank you so much. I think we have time for one last question before we break for lunch, and of course there's opportunity to continue the discussion over lunch. Yes?
Thank you. Mark, you mentioned looking for new models for the art world, and there are lots of places in the world at the moment where art is thriving. If you look at South Korea, lots of parts of Asia, the Middle East, but in a lot of those places, there's huge amounts of government funding that's driving all of that. I just wondered, are there any places in the world that you think have found those new models or are doing particularly well without necessarily, the funding that, as you say, isn't going to be there in this country anytime soon?
I mean, I don't think I do know anywhere. I mean, mostly there. It's interesting. The areas that I've been to recently, I went to Uzbekistan, to Bakhtir, and that whole Central Asia network, the stans, as someone's called them, are really using arts and culture as a way to rethink their identity, to draw out their uniqueness. There's Cree art, which is another interesting. We were involved very early on, which was 12 small-tier cities from Europe working together to cross-reference good practice, which is really worth looking at, with CRE and then ART. But what normally happens is that if you take the Middle East, for example, they're using culture as that's their big thing. So the museums and galleries, but then those sub-levels start appearing. The artists are starting to be generated. There's an entrepreneurial sort of structure behind it. And I think we've already had that. That's already here. We've got to try to react to what we've got and try and find the models based on what's already around us, like the East Bank's being a great example. But where it's really interesting is where the private sector, how can I put this? If you look at the private sector in terms of development at the moment, that's rental, residential, commercial. If I'll give you a good example, the Destination City program in the City of London. So after Brexit, big flight of businesses out of the city. So what they've tried to do is to create the City of London into a destination from a financial quarter. And what they've done there is effectively said to developers, if you come here and you want to get planning, you will not get anything unless you put together a robust cultural strategy. That strategy has to be costed, it has to be, you can decide what it is to some extent, the scale of it, we will test it, and that will help you get your planning. So it's really interesting how the developers, because they've got to do it, but because also the market wants that, has found it they know how to do it. They work with architects, artists, designers, and they're looking at new ways of developing their buildings. So I think there are kind of models out there. You talk about 106 is another planning rule, but I think there's lots of opportunities, but it's slightly out of our experience, and it's just trying to embrace that a bit. I think we're a bit scared of going into that territory. It looks a bit crass and hard, and maybe we don't want to be there. But once you get past the kind of block, it's amazing what is there and what the opportunities are. So I don't know if that didn't answer your question.
Thank you. Sadly, there's never enough time, and we're going to wrap up. I'd like to thank Tamsin, Mark, and Sylwia. Lots to chew on for lunch. Over to you.
That's it. You've said some of the thank yous, but thank you to you, Shwetal, as well, for moderating that super panel, and to Sylwia for flying in specially as well, and of course to Tamsin and Mark for all your insight. It is now time for lunch.